Good evening. Welcome to Conservative Viewpoint. I'm Phillip Crane, representative in Congress from the 13th District of Illinois. Tonight on our program we have the unique honor of having a man who is not only very learned in a subject that is much in the news today, but a man who is also very talented musically, writes his own music, sings his own music, very fine voice too, Mr. Dolf Droge. Dolf is on leave from AID to the White House. He is an authority on Vietnam, and we're going to get into a discussion tonight with Dolf on that subject and also listen to some of Dolf's songs. And it's a program on the basis of my knowledge of Dolf and his insights coupled with his talents that I'm sure you're going to find one of the most enjoyable of any that we've put on to date. Dolf, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Congressman Crane. It's a pleasure to be here.
We hear so much in the news about Vietnam on both sides, and we have over a period of years that one might reasonably ask the question, what more can be said? And yet I know, having seen you perform before students, that there's a great deal that has not been said, or at least has not been said well. And so I am grateful for this opportunity to have you present to our audience tonight some of the background history of Vietnam and getting into some of the personalities who played important roles there that we've all read about in the news. And I wonder, for openers, if you might get into a little bit of the history of the country itself and explain something to the viewing audience of the origins of Southeast Asia and the countries that are in question here. And I might say parenthetically on this point that Dolf has not only researched the subject, but he's been there, and been there going back before the fall of Dien Bien Phu, and his neighborhood territories over there include Thailand, Laos, and Vietnam, and he has been there most recently in February of this year, but many times in between. So, Dolf, will you begin the historical background?
One of the ironies of the Vietnam problem is that while there has been much discussion in this country, it's been the hawk and dove type discussion, and almost everything that has been the focus of discussion in the last 6 years in this country by the hawk and the dove is really not relevant to the Vietnamese problem. It's the irony that what you have to have is the owl position, I think, to look for the Vietnamese as they are. Now, we've personified them as we would imagine them to be, whether we really support the effort in Vietnam or we would oppose the effort. And the irony is that you begin with some very basic facts, and you turn to the map here, and you can see, now these are the Vietnamese, and here down this South China Sea coast, and these are people then that are really 2,500 years old, and they would consider us to be sort of a 200-year experiment doing nicely here in the United States. And at the same time, since they'll take no backseat in ego terms and should not because of their culture and their civilization, one learns right away that there are 3 Vietnams. Now, once again, turning to this map, you will see that this is what we call North Vietnam today, from the point here at the demilitarized zone all the way up to the China border. But actually, North Vietnam in history ends there, and that's 900 A.D. And so, from that point on, as they migrate further south, the Vietnamese become Central Vietnamese. By 1400, they're here. By 1600, they build 2 walls across the country for 100 years at this point. I think that Robert McNamara used to study those walls with nostalgia sometimes, to wonder how they did it and last 100 years. Down here, by 1600, the Central Vietnamese continued their migration. So that's Central Vietnam from this point on the map, 900 A.D. to 1600 A.D. And then from here down, it's South Vietnam. And none of these Vietnamese get along well, one with the other, as regional differences were exacerbated and deepened. So, for a Vietnamese today, when he looks at Vietnam, they're all one Viet people, but this division point on the DMZ grievously divides Central Vietnam from Central Vietnam, you see? Now, we don't really look at that, I think, with that kind of focus. We must also add that the DMZ, the 17th parallel, is very real. That is, it is an unsatisfactory line stemming from an unsatisfactory settlement, but so is the line separating North and South Korea, so is the line separating East and West Germany, and those lines are real. And the differences in the societies organized on each side of those lines, those societies are very real. In 1957, the Soviet Union said, let's let North and South Korea and North and South Vietnam into the United Nations because they're real. That's the Soviet Union's opinion in 1957, you see, which would come as a shock to many doves in this country and possibly to many hawks, because there is this tendency, the hawk wants to go all the way and the dove wants to get out, and neither are relevant to the problem, which is really who are the Vietnamese, what can be done to assist them to continue to be Vietnamese in their own way, their own diversity. And I don't think that history is well understood. And so it's with that focus that I would begin to say the homework gap has to be filled. And when you look at those countries and those peoples, you have in the South 18 million Vietnamese today, south of this line. You have 20 million in the North. But the 20 million in the North are controlled by 1 million people in the Communist Party who are led by 9 men today. Now, it's the policy of those 9 men, the Lao Dong Party, that's very important. And yet, if you went out in the streets of America tonight and you said to the first 20 people you met, Lao Dong Party, half of them would think you invited them to a weird social event, and the other half wouldn't know what you'd said. And that's unacceptable in an open society. In the 16th year of political involvement, not to even know the name of the party that had a role in the policy of the war from the other side. Now, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about that doesn't get discussed. The Vietnamese themselves also have a history of 1,000 years of Chinese rule, and that basically affected the North Vietnamese. And the North Vietnamese contend constantly with the Central Vietnamese. And the Central Vietnamese are regarded by both North and South Vietnamese as very, very cunning, Machiavellian, somewhat devious political aspirants, you see. And it's really true that Ho Chi Minh was Central Vietnamese, and Mr. Ngo Dinh Diem, the president of South Vietnam for 7 years, was Central Vietnamese, and Nguyen Van Thieu today in Saigon is Central Vietnamese. So maybe that stereotype about North and South regarding Central Vietnamese as looking at power as something they seek, it has a little validity. Now, then it means that it's kind of complicated, and I really was moved to write a song about Vietnam and the history, to be able to present in a few verses the 2,500 years of record of these people. And I did it also because of another reason. Sometimes we indicated as a country that we hadn't even learned, hawk or dove, to pronounce the name of the Vietnamese as we were helping them. I mean that in 1964, the Prime Minister of Vietnam, South Vietnam, took the hand of Robert McNamara and raised it in the air and said, Vietnam, Nam, Vietnam, 10,000 years. And Mr. McNamara wanted to be hospitable, and he took the hand of the Prime Minister and raised it in the air and said, Viet Nam, Mun Nam. And that means duck wants to lie down in the Vietnamese language. You see, well, the Vietnamese cheered. They'd really never seen such satire, that Americans had come 10,000 miles representing the millions of dollars and the thousands of advisors, but had not learned how to pronounce the name of the people for which they were making this tremendous effort. So I wrote a song which would, if nothing else, at least give the pronunciation of the country a chance. It tells about the 1,000 years of Chinese occupation, and then the 1,000 years of fighting the Chinese off, and then the 60 years of unity when for the only time in their history in 1802, North, Central, and South Vietnam were joined by the overthrow of the dynasty in the North. You see, that's the only unity these three areas have ever had in their history. And then the French coming, and then the present situation today. They came from China 2,000 years ago to the land of the dragon by the sea. They settled their country and watched their children grow, and they call themselves Vietnamese. Vietnam, Vietnam, land of the dragon by the sea. Vietnam, Vietnam, and they call themselves Vietnamese. Now, the first 1,000 years of Vietnamese history was the Chinese ruling them, and they finally threw the Chinese out. And the women did it. The women had the uprising, the women led the armies. The women are very important in Vietnam. Women's lib in this country only asks for equality. Women in Vietnam have achieved absolute superiority, but they never mention it. At first 1,000 years, the Chinese ruled their land. Still, they struggled to be free. Their heroines and heroes arose in guerrilla bands, and one day they won their victory. Now, the next 1,000 years, they fought the Chinese off. The Vietnamese had a feeling if you give a Chinese a spear for Christmas, he'll start walking south. And And so they fought them off with 15 wars with China, 3 wars with Kublai Khan, and they still remain Vietnamese. I want to say one thing. All those wars ended one way. The Vietnamese won that war, each war, because the enemy quit at home due to his domestic priorities. China won many wars on the battlefield, but always there was trouble in Dynasty City, way back there in China, and they had to go home. That should give you a clue as to how Vietnamese think wars end. That second 1,000 years they fought the Chinese off. There were wars and attacks continually. There were 3 separate battles with Mr. Kublai Khan, and still they remain Vietnamese. Now in that next period, when the French come to shatter that unity, that's very bitter, because the Vietnamese had finally managed in 1802 to get those 3 parts together, but remember, it was by subjugation, not by agreement or consensus. For 60 precious years, they unified their land, the North, the Central, and the South. Then the French arrived behind missionary bands, and they ruled through the cannon's mouth. And then finally, after that long struggle against the French and 90 years of trying to throw them out, just as they were about to throw them out, and only 3 years shy of victory, the Communist Party couped the independence movement in March of 1951 and took control of the front against the French.
This is a very important point that you make right here, Dolf, and I wish you'd dwell on that momentarily, and that is the failure on the part of so many Americans to understand that in the war to overthrow French colonialism, that there were 2 thrusts, one nationalist, one communist.
In fact, Congressman Crane, the first resistance to the French were Mandarins. The second resistance were students who disliked the fact that the French banned the Vietnamese language in high schools and universities for 90 years. And the next resistance were nationalists inspired by Sun Yat-sen in 1911. And the last people to come down the trail were the communists, you see. And you would say, for 90 long years, they struggled against the French. Dien Bien Phu was their victory day, but that big red flag betrayed them in the north, while the south went the other way. Now, you know, that really was a sad day for Vietnamese because they wanted independence. They didn't get it. The Lao Dong Party was a Marxist-Leninist party. Well, Marx, to the Vietnamese, is a very late comer in the field of philosophy and thought and political organization. They believe in the yin and the yang, the Taoist principle, the Confucian principles, the Buddhist principles, the ancestor veneration principles, and here comes Marx, you know, a 19th century German with carbuncles who sits in the London Museum and writes out his view of history. And you're not going to really sell 2,500-year-old people on a 19th century Head Start program for European philosophers. So you're always going to disguise communism when you approach a Vietnamese and call it the front. And I think the man that really epitomizes this more than any other would be Ho Chi Minh himself. He changed his name 22 times in his life, more times than the American Foreign Aid Program, in fact, and for exactly the same reason, to survive, you see. But for the Vietnamese looking ahead now, they have this: someday the guns will cease, soldiers go home, farmers plow in peace and children play, and the South Vietnamese will join their Asian neighborhood and turn the Mekong River into a TVA. That's the commercial, see. Vietnam, Vietnam, land of the dragon by the sea. Vietnam, Vietnam, and they call themselves Vietnamese. Now you see, what I'm saying is, the people are real, their country is real, their history is real, it's not like anything we've encountered, and those who are hawks and those who are doves in this country must stop trying to force these Vietnamese into a mold of preconceptions that would fit what we think to be our stand at this moment on a very deep and tragic and ugly and terrible war. So I think that when we look at this and take the Vietnamese as our guide, you really come out with a different view. When Vietnamese look at Ho Chi Minh, they see a man who, when he was born, was Nguyen who will be victorious in 1890. He left his country in 1912, never to return again until 1941. He changed his name many times. He appealed to Woodrow Wilson in Paris or in Versailles in 1919 for freedom for Vietnam. You know, hey, Woodrow, how about 15 points? But they didn't have time to see him. But in 1920, he changed his name, and I would say he set his course for the rest of his life. And his name was Nguyen Ai Quoc, Nguyen the Patriot. And when he changed his name, he founded the French Communist Party, after the Socialist Congress had split into two wings in 1920, and he went to Moscow in 1923, and he was at the Lenin Institute, and he was at the Toilers of the East School, and he was in China then in 1925 as a Soviet citizen with a Soviet passport. Now that really changes his focus, and when he's there, his first action is to take this chance to invite the leading fighter against the French, Mr. Fan Boi Chow, a man who had struggled against the French about 25 years before Nguyen Ai Quoc had ever come of age. And he asked Mr. Chow to come to Shanghai and talk about revolution, and he sells Fan Boi Chow to the French security police for cash. And he uses the cash to found the communist movement, and the first protest of the movement in the streets is, we protest the inhuman French arrest of Fan Boi Chow. Well, you know, now you're dealing with a pro. 200 other Vietnamese are invited to China to come to study revolution for 1 year on a grant, and if they don't join the communist movement, they're betrayed. Now that goes on till 1928. Then he flees China because China is breaking up. The coalition between the communists and the nationalists is collapsing. In 1930, he founds the Indo-Chinese Communist Party in Hong Kong, and in 1933, Nguyen Ai Quoc, betrayer of nationalists, dies in Hong Kong. Now that's why, for 8 years, he's dead, and then a new man appears, 1941, says, I'm Ho Chi Minh. I don't ask you to join the communist movement. I'm not Nguyen Ai Quoc. He died in 1933. Join me in a front against the Japanese. Now, they joined him, and they love him, under the name of Ho Chi Minh. But, you know, introduce Al Capone as John Kennedy, you get a very positive reaction. You know, it's just that the farmer wouldn't know that in Vietnam. But I would expect the university in this country to know that. I would expect the media in this country to know that. I would expect when Ho died in 1969 to know that. Because even Ho himself in 1960 in Hanoi dropped the mask and said in public print, here's my picture when I was Ho Chi Minh, and here at the left is my picture in 1925 when I was known as Nguyen Ai Quoc. Now you see, that's a homework gap then, if all this discussion has taken place. I've written a little song about Ho Chi Minh, which I think is fitting for this particular subject, a ballad of a real man, a brilliant communist revolutionary organizer, but who should not be demeaned as simply a Simon Pure nationalist. He had a lot of other affiliations. Let me tell you the story of a man named Ho Chi Minh. Changed his name 22 times to hide his next of kin. Trained in Moscow to betray his non-red friends. That is part of the story of a man named Ho Chi Minh. Ho, ho, Ho Chi Minh. How many Vietnamese have you done in? Your record is long and your mask is wearing thin. Ho, 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 Ho Chi Minh. In 1925, your alias was Nguyen Ai Quoc. You invited Fan Boi Chow, the nationalist, and you put him on the block. You sold him to the French police in Shanghai, you see, and you used the cash to found your communist party. Ho, ho, Ho Chi Minh. How many Vietnamese have you done in? Your record is long and your mask is wearing thin. Ho, 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 Ho Chi Minh. Nguyen Ai Quoc died in 1933, so everyone believed. The betrayer was in his grave, and most folks were much relieved. But you hid out till 1941. You took the name of Ho Chi Minh. Ho was determined to be enlightened. And the whole darn thing started over again. So ho, ho, Ho Chi Minh. How many Vietnamese have you done in? Your record is long and your mask is oh so thin. Ho, ho. That is part of a story of a man named Ho Chi Minh.
Well, that's certainly a part of a story of a man named Ho Chi Minh that is not widely known on the campuses in particular.
Because it doesn't fit the preconception that there must be all of the points of justice on one side of the issue. Americans are monistic people. They go to Armageddon every day with good and evil contesting. And Americans want to choose good over evil. Vietnamese are people who believe there are 58 shades of good and 58 shades of evil in any one situation. They seek a constant balance of these. Therefore, much of the thought of those who call themselves revolutionary today in our society is predicated on an incredibly middle-class, bourgeois, Judeo-Christian hang-up. They want to be totally guilty. They want their country to be totally guilty so they can totally repent. It's much more complicated than that. There are Vietnamese Lao Dong Party leaders in Hanoi. There is Saigon government in the south. There's 2,300 villages in South Vietnam in 256 counties. Whether or not they get service from those counties determines those villages, but in those villages they believe in village self-government. Their whole political tradition is built on the idea of villages electing their own leadership. Now, we don't know that. We think if village elections are held in Vietnam, they're our idea that we've taken to Vietnam. Yet they did it in 1600 at the order of the emperor when we were a settlement at Jamestown with a lot of bad luck.
Goodness. You know, this comment that you make, observation about this tendency on the part of the revolutionary or the dove element in our society, is also perhaps in part applicable at the other end of the spectrum on the part of those who've generally been classified as hawks. And I know that you have a song that deals with the hawks, the doves, and the owls. I wonder if you might sing that one.
Yes, I've tried to do this because I think that it's the best way you can put across some of this idea that it's not wrong to be a hawk or a dove, but it's lessening your impact. Because when you protest something in Vietnam, if you want to put the pressure on the situation, you must use the Vietnamese elements that are there. If the Saigon government is not broadly based enough for you, then the way to put pressure on is not to insult them or call them fascists, but to address them in ways that indicates they have a constitution, live up to it. You see, if the people in Hanoi play a role that they do in this war, having sent 10 divisions to South Vietnam since 1964, having placed 90,000 troops in Laos where they have no right to be, having placed 40,000 troops in Cambodia where they have no right to be, and having done all this early, before any American combat troops ever arrived. In the case of Laos, North Vietnamese violations go back to 1957. In the case of Cambodia, 1965, with regular army troops. And American combat forces are not in Laos, are not in Cambodia, and are in South Vietnam only since 65. So I've tried to really put these points forward as what an owl could achieve, you see.
Right.
The Ballad of the Hawk, the Dove, and the Owl. And the hawk says all the way to victory, and the dove says yesterday depart, but that owl says understand these people and the way they feel deep down in their heart. They live in a Confucian nation. Education is their goal. Their life is but a reincarnation of a never-ending Vietnamese soul. When the war started in 1957, North Vietnam had sent from the north 100,000 Southerners, or the beginnings of the elements of 100,000 Southerners. They'd had training for 2 years for elections that they said were going to take place when the French held them and when the North Vietnamese held them. No one else agreed to hold elections. Only 2 signatures are there on the Geneva Accords. And so France and North Vietnam are pledged. France goes home early. North Vietnam has a land reform rebellion against its own society, cannot hold those elections. The precincts are rotten in North Vietnam in 1956. So down from the north come the Southerners. Here's that Vietnamese out in the countryside. His government has abolished village self-government in 56 due to the lack of security, as was the Saigon view at that time. So the farmer doesn't have his own leadership in the village, and down comes a man to kill the leader that's there. Well, that's a time for the Vietnamese to rely on their Taoist belief. Taoism, the yin and the yang, walk the middle way when the forces are in harmony. When they're not in harmony, it's not your fault. Go sit under a tree, get mediocre, don't get killed in the semifinals. Now that's really the Vietnamese view. So they have the yin and the yang to guide them. They walk the middle path in harmony. But when chaos and trouble fall astride them, they survive the semifinals sitting underneath a tree. Now, I would say the communists killed the corrupt first and the efficient second, and the mediocre they never touched. And Vietnamese got mediocre by the numbers from 1957 to 1964. In 1964, North Vietnam had used up their 100,000 Southerners, basically, the ones they had in that manpower pool they had ordered north after Geneva. So they turned to the regular army. Their hawks, their doves, their owls had the discussion. They decided to put the regular army in. It arrived in November and December, just after we had had an election. That changed the nature of the war. American combat response came in 65, 6 months later in 1965. And we were there just in time to prevent the collapse of Vietnam. Unfortunately, we didn't begin then looking at the Vietnamese and saying, what can you do if you use the term Vietnamization? Why don't we get you into the picture right now? No, we kind of pushed them aside. And the Vietnamese would say, well, I've been mediocre a long time, but I'm not incompetent, you see. And so, in fact, they begin to take a role only in 1969 when we've now given them this focus. Now, a Vietnamese has this kind of view of his village. If a man comes down from the county and the taxes and laws he does abuse, and the Viet Cong steal the rice and kill the teacher, then the farmer hopes that both sides really lose. A North Vietnamese invading army, responding one from the USA, are both equally alien to the farmer. He wants freedom in a special Southern way. But if a farmer has a school for his children, land reform and a long-term credit loan, he'll shoulder his plow and his rifle and take his stand defending his home. That's what Vietnamization's all about, see? Land reform, agricultural credit, IR-8 rice, Vietnamese meeting their own defense responsibilities. And we're late doing it, but we're doing it. And we're pulling our troops out, and that's essential to get the Vietnamese this clear implication the Americans are going home. No one ever came to Vietnam to go home before. So we're not the French, we're not like all their other experiences. And now the question is, will Hanoi negotiate to get us out faster? What Hanoi wants is a date. If we set a date, we're giving them the only thing they would have a reason to negotiate to get. So you come down to a very special, difficult, and sensitive moment in this country, and I would say once again, the hawk.
Dolf, before you get into this, unfortunately, we're running out of time, and
why don't you say goodbye to the people, and I'll just do this as a background.
I'll do that, and I thank you all for watching the program tonight, and we'll look forward to being with you next week, and thank you, Dolf.
Thank you, Congressman Crane. And the dove says, yesterday depart, but that owl says, understand these people and the way they feel deep down in their heart.
Welcome to Conservative Viewpoint. I'm Phillip Crane, representative from the 13th Congressional District of Illinois. Tonight on our program we have a first repeat performance. We might say part two of our program that we viewed last week dealing with Vietnam. And I have the same distinguished guest that we had last week, Mr. Dolf Droge. Mr. Droge is on leave of absence from AID to the White House right now. As I indicated last week, he's had years of experience in Vietnam dating back to prior to the fall of Dien Bien Phu in 1954, and most recently he was in Vietnam in February of this year. But his experience is in-depth, his knowledge of the area is as vast as anyone's I know, and it's not confined to Vietnam, but Laos, Cambodia, all of Southeast Asia. He not only is knowledgeable, but he's very talented, and he has his guitar again with us this week to provide songs that he has written to help elaborate an understanding of the subject. And last week when we broke Dolf, we were discussing the problems that occurred after 1964 when the communist cadres that had been sent into South Vietnam out of the North had been virtually exhausted, and they made the decision to send troops from North Vietnam into the South. And then something radical happened in the Vietnam conflict. There was the massive commitment of American combat troops. And I think we might just pick up from that point because after this assumption in 1965 that the United States had to intervene so massively in the defense of South Vietnam, we have since come to the conclusion 5 years later or 6 years later that we can turn the responsibilities back to the South under the President's Vietnamization program. And what is the basis for making that decision when 5 or 6 years ago we concluded they couldn't make it on their own?
I think, Congressman Crane, that the first thing is that North Vietnamese figured we would do nothing. They figured they could get away with wrapping up the war fast. So their view of putting troops in would be many times in the past, 4 times since 1946, in communist to communist terms, the northern faction in the Communist Party in Hanoi sold out the southern communist interests. The French returned in 1946 by the signature of Ho Chi Minh. Geneva Conference was a trade-off with the South having to wait 2 years. And one would ask, why? Ho won the war, why did he lose the peace? Well, we didn't sign and South Vietnam didn't sign, so it wasn't our role. It was Ho Chi Minh saying to his Moscow friends, yes, I'll give the French 2 years. It'll be a trade-off that Moscow had asked for because of the European Defense Community Bill in the French Parliament. It was a very complicated thing with Moscow priorities for Western Europe's defenses as the major priority. And then, again, in 1956, no elections. France left, North Vietnam had a rebellion against its regime. So that hawk in Hanoi had a good case in '64. You can't sell out the Southern movement again. Send in the army this time. Wrap it up. Then we, the inscrutable American, as the North Vietnamese would say, we responded. For 7 years, we'd used advisors. Advisors were sort of like ants floating downstream on a log, each one under the illusion he was steering. You know, they had no power, no control. They simply advised. Vietnamese who took their advice in many cases were killed by the communists, politically executed. Then when you came to this larger role of 17,000 American advisors, only 14,000 of them were living in the city. So 3,000 lived where the problem was in the countryside. And this gets down to the fact that the communists were in the villages and we were not. So in a way, America was there a long time, but in a way, America was hardly there at all. And that's where we lost those years. And those were those lost opportunities and lost moments for leverage and for perhaps stemming the tide of the political deterioration. So when the North Vietnamese put their army in, it was very clear that we had only one real choice. Do you want South Vietnam to go down? Are you going to let it collapse, or are you going to do something to save it? So I really think the decision of 1965 to send troops was courageous, and I think it was correct. On the other hand, having sent the troops, we Americans do a certain thing. It's our own psychology. We take over problems. And the Vietnamese were standing up saying, I've been in the semifinals a long time. That's the way they looked at this indeterminate period. Don't get killed in the semifinals. The good Taoists would say. The yin and the yang are out of harmony. This is a bad time. Don't do a thing. 1957 to 1964. Suddenly in 1965, the Americans are here. The bombs are falling on North Vietnam. The American troops are in South Vietnam. They save South Vietnam. Southerner stands up and says, I think maybe I'm not going to lose. And the American says, would you move out of my way, please? This is my war. Well, that starts the process. We build bases in '66. In '67, we set out to win. But I think even there, it's wise to consider that at that moment, the South Vietnamese had already moved through political turmoil and what we'd call chaos in the streets. They had moved, because of protests by the Buddhists, to forming a new constitution. And the Constitution said village elections. And the village elections had not existed since 1956. And once they were back in, 1,000 villages voted, despite the Viet Cong threat. Now that made for the Viet Cong a new problem on the priority list of how do you keep South Vietnam from politicking without you. And the North Vietnamese would say right away, we can't let the South develop politically while the Americans are defeating us on the battlefield. About 30 to 40% of this war is military. 60% of the war is political. It's Vietnamese. An American can win on the battlefield, but he can't be Vietnamese. So the North would know that it was more dangerous to see village elections in South Vietnam than it would be to see American troops on the battlefield, because these Vietnamese were organizing in their own society. Then you came to the moment when they had national elections following village elections. That would be the summer of 1967. Then it was the fall of 1967, the autumn. And then the new government was in. From that moment, the Tet attacks were preordained because General Giap was going to then crush the central nervous system and the brain, if you will, of the Saigon and South Vietnam government apparatus. His view would be, you destroy this because the villages are now growing with their own councils elected by their own leaders. That's deadly. Now we have to move in and kill at the top the willingness of the Vietnamese to form this kind of government. And so they attacked every city. And they also thought 1968 is an election year. It's the only year in a presidential election year in the United States you can get a kind of a replay of the French falling after Dien Bien Phu. The idea that cabinets fall in France and there's a crisis of confidence. In America, every 4 years, the amateurs elect the professionals. And that's a system that I think is the best in the world. But it does allow the vulnerability that in that year, all the pressures are focused, and anyone who wants to get the United States to change does it that year. So the Tet attacks were to crush us just as well as Saigon. Well, it was very interesting to see then that they put all these resources in. They attack 43 cities. They don't hold any city except in Hue for 26 days. And there they carry out their political program.
Yes, their political program is one that is too frequently and conveniently shoved into the background of the American consciousness because, and I know that there's a song that you have dealing with their program in a way.
Yes, the North Vietnamese occupied the city with their troops, but the local Viet Cong are the ones who, in fact, then surfaced in the city and carried out their political program. The first killings they carried out were political executions by kangaroo court in public. These were the people who served the government, and they said, you have taken the wrong side, you see, and we kill you. Then they asked for members of social units to attend orientation courses. This was social units. These were social units like women's organizations, students' organizations. They had the pro-communist students in one organization from the University of Hue included in the social unit. And they took these social units and their members to the edge of the city and murdered them, shot them in the back of the head, strangled them with cords, or buried them alive, because they stood in the way of a new society, because they were not the disciplined elite of the conspiratorial group like the Lao Dong Party, you see. And then, of course, the last killings, when they lost the city, were the eyewitnesses. They killed those who had seen the first 2 waves of killings. Now, that was about 5,700 people killed. This brought the Vietnamese, both in Hue and in other parts of the country, to that consciousness of, you've got to take a role here. There's no fence left to sit on because the communists are absolutely implacable in this carrying out of a program. We charged the communists with an atrocity. We said, you know, that was an atrocity in Hue. And they broadcast back in the open from Radio Hanoi. In their broadcast, they said, we were charged with an atrocity. That is ridiculous. Our southern forces collected blood debts. They collected blood debts. That's a policy. Well, Vietnamese had a reaction to that. And it's very interesting to note that there was a very small amount of protest around the world, whether in this country or elsewhere, concerning the atrocity of the Hue massacre. And it makes you think that a lot of people have one-eyed morality. They're outraged at certain things, and so am I, where our side has erred, or those we support have erred. But also, when you have a policy, as opposed to an aberration, then I think there is some reason for real protest of a policy. And that policy was the communist policy of eliminating people in Hue. So I wrote a song called Voices of the Dead. In the city of Hue, in South Vietnam, the men of Ho Chi Minh came to call. They occupied that city for 3 long weeks that year and put 5,000 people against the wall. For the sake of the future, hear the voices of the dead. Strangulation, live burial, or a bullet in the head. And remember, dear neighbor, if now you cut and run, then the future will be written by the executioner's gun. They killed school teachers and politicians too. They killed intellectuals and lots of folks like you. They killed those with whom in peace they might compete. They killed from a list, and the list it was complete. For the sake of the future, hear the voices of the dead. Strangulation, live burial, or a bullet in the head. And remember, dear neighbor, if now you turn and run, then the future will be written by the executioner's gun. In the city of Hue in South Vietnam, the men of Ho Chi Minh came to call. They occupied that city for 3 long weeks that year and put 5,000 people against the wall. For the sake of the future, hear the voices of the dead, the voices of the dead, the voices of the dead.
That's a very moving song, and I think it's particularly poignant because, as I indicated, people have so frequently overlooked in this country the fact that that is policy, conscious policy.
I think also the implication of what does a coalition mean?
Right.
Now, a coalition the Vietnamese choose is one thing, but a coalition imposed, as the National Liberation Front insists upon, is another. And Hanoi and the National Liberation Front say impose a coalition and that's a reasonable settlement. Well, for Vietnamese with that experience, with that closeness to the Hue tragedy, I'm sure they would have long, long thoughts about anything they could not themselves really choose in all the elements. The NLF says, well, we want 1/3 communists. And then we want 1/3 of the Saigon government people who can join, who are not, or who are for independence, peace, and neutrality. And then they want 1/3 of the non-Saigon government people who are for independence, peace, and neutrality. The only hooker is that only the NLF can tell you who really is for peace, independence, and neutrality, they say. And so what you have is a 1/3 communist and a veto power over the other 2/3. Now that's really not very democratic, reasonable, or a path that would end a war in a way that would preserve the diversity of the Vietnamese. You know, that's 2 million Catholics and 2 million Hoa Hao, who are an offshoot of the Buddhists, and 2 million Cao Dai, who are a very, very important religious sect in Vietnam, and 800,000 mountain tribes, who are 30 different tribes, really, and 30% of the country who are Buddhist. So what Tet did with that attack was really to put Vietnam in the resolve that there was no way to avoid a commitment, that now it was their stake and their future. And so perhaps, ironically, the communists gave the best indoctrination to the Vietnamese as to why they should take a role in Vietnamization, because it was their future and their neck at stake. On the other hand, in America, the trauma of Tet caused many things to happen. The President of the United States, of course, did not run again to succeed himself as a candidate in the Democratic Party. There was the convention in Chicago, the Democratic National Convention, in your backyard, and that was certainly a tumultuous time. And then there was the election. And if Hanoi had been betting that this would break the United States in terms of its policy, in the record of 2,500 years of seeing all opponents of Vietnam quit because of home priorities, in comes President Nixon and says, my program is Vietnamization and negotiation. Now that's very different then. That says I'm going to give the Southerner time and training and equipment to support his own view, and his own view is he doesn't want to be ruled by the North. That's infinitely more dangerous to a Northern communist design or goal than an American who will go home, who is far from his land, who does have other priorities. So the president is really saying to the North, if you want to negotiate, fine, we'll all get out faster. We'll have an Indochina ceasefire, an Indochina peace conference, a mutual withdrawal of the alien troops. North Vietnamese alien to the South, American alien, certainly alien to South Vietnam. And they'll go home. And they'll go home on a verifiable timetable, total withdrawal, but mutual. And we'll have an exchange of all prisoners of war now. And we'll have a settlement of the South with all political forces in the South represented fairly. So the Viet Cong can come in and run. And this is the rub, you see. The Communists could wait through 1969 to get over Tet because it crippled them. And 1,000 more villages voted in South Vietnam as a result. So 2,000 were then participating out of 2,300 that existed in the country. Then in 70, the Communists in 1970 could plan on attacking out of Cambodian sanctuaries and destroying Vietnamization. Then the Cambodian decisions, both of the South Vietnamese and of President Nixon, resulted in the destruction of those sanctuaries. And so there were no attacks on Vietnamization in 1970. Then 1971, they're getting ready. Why? Because 1971 is a South Vietnamese election year, and North Vietnam is getting ready to try to crush those elections. But while they're doing it, the Laos operation is launched, and the Vietnamese go in on the ground, showing somewhat of the improvement that the South Vietnamese forces have registered. 4 years ago, some said they couldn't pull up their socks. In 1970, they're helping in the Cambodian operation. In 1971, they're conducting for 40 days the operation in Laos. Some people said they didn't stay long enough. 40 days in the palm of the hand of the enemy is a long time. American units in South Vietnam have never stayed longer than 18 days in combat without rotation and relief throughout the war. 40 days is a long time to sit in the palm of the hand of the enemy with anti-aircraft in his favor, with the terrain he knows intimately, and then come out and not come out losing your total army. What they had were 4 battalions that didn't perform well and 18 that performed very well. Well, that can't show North Vietnam time is on the side of the North. That shows Vietnamization is growing. And so the president repeats again, negotiate. It's there at Paris. You want us out faster? Then negotiate. But every time Hanoi looks at this country, it has to decide who speaks for America. Is it the dove? Is it the hawk? Or is it the owl? And now we're in a period where the dove's voice is heard very loudly. And I would say that at this time then, the hawk in Hanoi has more leverage, and the dove, the communist dove in Hanoi, has less leverage to say their role in the debate would be to convince one party, one faction, or the other of some change of policy. In North Vietnam, they've lost 700,000 young men in the war, in the South. They never told their people they were going until 1968. They told their people that we were invading North Vietnam. That was what the bombing was about. The bombing ended. The people said, fine, we've defeated D-Day. America is not going to come to invade us now. Where's my son? And then, interestingly enough, rather than say, oh, we'll tell you later, someone decided to send the wounded home to North Vietnam, the blind, the crippled, the amputee. The hippies now exist in North Vietnamese society. The mother on the stage in a North Vietnamese drama saying, why should I send my son south? So many have gone, so few have returned. In other words, the pressures are there in their society for the domestic priorities, and it does turn out to be the Vietnamese pattern of 2,500 years. Hanoi may quit, or Washington may quit, or Saigon may quit. That may be the end of the war, but Hanoi is included in the possibility of changing its policy. And so, today, the Vietnamese would say in the South, we're getting ready. Now train us, give us time. You didn't pay any attention to us for years. You fought the war as your own. Well, we Vietnamese know that it's our own country and our own struggle, and we have to then have the training, the time. 500,000 guns have been given to farmers today, too old, too young for the draft, in South Vietnam. They defend their village with them in a self-defense force, but they also remember how to put the cartridge in the chamber to collect on unfulfilled government promises in the future. That's very interesting for the government in Saigon to do that.
This is a particularly interesting point in light of some of the allegations of how tyrannical is the regime in Saigon. And if it were that tyrannical, they wouldn't dare put arms in the hands of so many people that could be turned back on the government itself. By contrast, look at the North.
Yes, the North has no candidates in jail because the North has no candidates. I mean, it's a very different situation. But I would say this, that in South Vietnam, there have been people jailed. There have been actions that I would not call in the best interest of South Vietnam taken by the South Vietnamese themselves. However, this is a war. It's a long one. It's been going on for them more than 13 years. And it's a backyard war. And at that time, there are stresses. Abraham Lincoln killed 1,000 people in the streets of New York with cannon during the draft protests in the Civil War in the United States.
And jailed many political opponents.
Right, but I would say this about how repressive South Vietnam is. The Buddhists who opposed the policy of the president of South Vietnam ran and contested for the Senate seats in 1970 and won the first slate of 10 seats in the Senate. Now, you can't have it both ways. Either the government is totally repressive, doesn't allow any opposition, or a government has a willingness to have a constitutional process under which opposition is permitted, but certain things are ruled out. Namely, the man that was jailed who ran for the presidency was jailed not for running and not for polling 17% of the votes, but in 1967, he ran, and in 68, he proposed coalition government, right after the Tet attacks, right after that terrible time of 43 cities being struck by the enemy. Well, now that's a little touchy moment to mention coalition government, and especially when you talk about imposed, you see. But the Buddhists won in 1970 in September. The communists said these elections were a fraud. The Buddhists said they were the fairest elections they'd ever been in. Now, that's the pressure on North Vietnam today in 1971. 1,000 villages vote this summer, starting in May, every Sunday in the summer. Then the lower house is chosen, and then the presidency and vice presidency in October, lower house in August. Now, you know, those elections are important for Vietnamese. What if the Viet Cong don't take up President Thie's offer to come in and run and sit on the Election Arrangements Committee and help with international supervision? Well, if the countryside votes without the Viet Cong more and more appear to be a political anachronism in their own backyard, and that's bad for their movement, they believe. So they want us to name a date, and that means there will be no elections. June 30th, 1971 is a date Madame Bin, the head of the NLF delegation in Paris, offered to us. That merely says, give us a date that'll tell the Vietnamese you're going home by that date, and they won't want to incriminate themselves by taking part in a process which is going to have them against the wall in a repeat of the Hue massacre when the communists take over. You see? That's this element again of the yin and the yang, of the survival of the man through the semifinals. The communists are in the semifinals now. Their forces defect out of the Viet Cong. 157,000 come out to seek a bleacher seat and sit in it and look to see what's going to happen. But on the other hand, if you set a date, you tell the South Vietnamese, I see the semifinals coming. And the South Vietnamese then have to get uncommitted, unconnected, unstigmatized, if you will. That's what they have to worry about, and we sometimes don't see it. We think a date is very reasonable. So this is a song I wrote about Vietnamization. I think it would sum it up. In America, now this is a Vietnamese singing, not American. In America, they speak of Vietnamization. A word that means an awful lot to me. It means that I must carry my own burden and meet my own responsibility. Put it on my shoulder. I'm Vietnamese. Vietnamization is how it ought to be. See, the man is not mediocre anymore, and he was never incompetent, so he can take a role. In 1965, you Yanks were needed, responding to the troops sent by Hanoi. By 1968, Ho'd been defeated and attacked our cities at Tet in a desperate ploy. Our army stood and fought, so did our people. And then at last our cities were swept clean. But in America, you felt you'd been defeated. Ho's attack almost got the mimeograph machine. Put it on my shoulder. I'm Vietnamese. Vietnamization means a lot to me. LBJ retired to the prairie, far from the Chicago strife-torn political scene. And a feller named Richard Milhouse Nixon for Christmas gave me an M16. Put it on my shoulder. I'm Vietnamese. Vietnamization, it means a lot to me. America, if you will go home slowly and train me as you go, then we shall see if I can meet the challenge of the future, developing in peace and staying free. So a Vietnamese says, pay no attention to the dove. Give me all that training time you see, and go home just like porcupines make love, very, very, very carefully. Put it on my shoulder. a lot to me. It's how it ought to be. It means I'm free.
Dolf, tragically, we're running out of time here, and before we do, and in the event that time runs short on us in the process, there's one final subject that we haven't touched upon, and that has to do with the plight of American POWs, and you have a very, very excellent song on that subject. Would you sing that? And in the event we run out of time, I'll conclude and say goodnight to you all now, and thank you, Dolf, for being on the program.
Thank you very much, Congressman Crane. This is a song that is designed to call attention to our men, because there are government policies saying we care, but there is no book, no song, no movie, no poem, no play, no drama in this country that says we care, so I've written one. It says we care, and it says we care not that these men are just being mistreated by our standards of Western behavior, but they're being mistreated in violation of 2,500 years of Vietnamese culture and tradition. So the communists are really out of step in Hanoi, and we should call their attention to it. I symbolize all our men, airmen, soldiers, sailors, Marines, as eagles in those prison camps, North, South Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, held by the communists. Don't forget the eagles who served our country well, but they are wasting now for months and years in a dark and lonely cell. Don't forget these men whom you so proudly knew, for they are your loved ones, your fathers and your brothers too. Can Hanoi have so little value for a human life? Why won't they even answer? Are you a widow or a wife? Don't forsake these men who once so bravely flew. Don't forget the eagles, their life depends on you. Don't forget the eagles, now shackled night and day. No letter from home, no friendly voice, 10,000 miles away. Don't forget these men whom you so proudly knew, for they are our loved ones, our fathers and our brothers too. Now hawk and dove, we all must speak, so Hanoi will know. Peace would be much closer if they let our people go. Don't forsake these men who once so bravely flew. Don't forget the eagles, their life depends on you. And if we 200